Okay, this is rigging, human male. This is the third step, or the third part. The first two parts were mostly just talking about naming conventions, and you can see some of that in my outliner here, as far as all my proxy shapes being properly named, and we will be naming our joints later. The second part was going over the Maya's human IK system here, and let's see, now we're going over the custom rig. So the first thing I want to point out is that I do have 3 display layers here in the bottom right of the channel box, and I have the human proxy, which is just my proxy shapes, and I will be using those later in another step, but for now we're just using them as reference. I have my character mesh, and then I have another display layer called untouchables, which we will be putting in everything that we don't want the animator to manipulate or change, such as the IK handles, things like that. Now later down the road in future future videos or future steps, I will be going over how to take our fully rigged character and turn it into an asset, and that will cover that will make sure that it hides everything that we don't want the animator to see or to touch, and it will give the animator only the controls and the channels that we want them to be able to manipulate. So I'm going to go back to my character mesh, and I'm going to go into a wireframe mode and go into my side view. I'm going to go up to skeleton and joint tool, and I'm going to go to the option box, which is going to bring up my tool settings, and I'm going to reset the tool, and then I'm going to place a joint about where the hip is going to go. And then I'm going to place another joint right behind the knee, right towards the middle. The knee actually bends right there, opposed to out here or back here. And this will give us room to place a kneecap where when we get to that stage. Then I'm going to go down to the ankle, to the ball of the foot, and then to the end of the toes. I'm going to press enter, and we have our first joint chain. Now what I do is I go into my front view, position my joints, and you want to make sure that you do not use rotate to rotate your joints into place. You want to translate them, and the reason being is Maya, when you rotate, when you animate, Maya's really only calculating the rotation of your joints. It's not really calculating the translation. The translation data usually will come from the control handles and not necessarily the joints themselves. So now that we have that and everything is in place, we're going to go through and name our joints. Now, in step 1, I did talk about proper naming conventions, and so I won't go over them here. If you like, you can go back and look at step 1, but for time constraints and because these videos are getting kind of long, and this is, I think, the 3rd time I've gone through this, I will not be naming them here, but just follow step 1 and you'll be able to follow the proper naming conventions and stuff. Okay, now with our joints properly named, we want to go into our attribute editor, and we want to go to joint labeling, and we want to label our joints. The reason why we want to label our joints is if we ever retarget this rig from a normal human height to a, say, giant, or down to a gnome or something like that, or even just sending the information from this rig into another rig, The joint labeling will really help us with that. Plus, it does help with if you do any scripting, things like that as well. Position these a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go to Skeleton, Joint Labeling, Add Joint Labels, and then I'm going to select the dashed bar, and that's going to pull out the drop-down menu here. So these are all on the left-hand side, so label left, and I'm going to display all my labels, and you can do that a couple different ways. You can either select each individual one and check the draw label box here in the attribute editor, or you can go up to display, animation, and joint labels. I created a shelf button, which is the exact same thing, so that just saves time. So now you can see that these all have an L on them for left. So now we want to go through and name them accordingly. So we go to hip, knee, foot, which is our ankle. This is going to be the toe base, and I just select big toe, so I know it's the toe. It distinguishes the difference between the toe base and the toe. Okay, then what I do is I match the color of the label. So I change my joints to match the color of the label, if that makes sense. So we go down in our attribute editor and go to drawing overrides, or I'm sorry, display, and then drawing overrides, and then enable drawing overrides, and I match the color of that as best I can, which is a purple color. And you have to do this for each joint. The children will adopt the parent's color, but just to be sure, I go through and do it for every joint. And this will help the animator see which side is the left, which side is the right. Plus, it helps us out in rigging as well. We can determine which side is left, which side is right a lot faster than having to click on it and figure out, oh, it's the left side. Okay, so now from here we want to mirror our joints over to the other side, and for that we're going to select the hip joint, go to skeleton, and mirror joint option box, and this is going to bring up our window here. Okay, and we want to make sure that we're mirroring in our X and Z, and we want to make sure that behavior is set on. And then to make your life easier as far as your naming, we want to search for everything that starts with left, which if we look in our attribute editor here, all of our joints should start with left underscore, and we're going to replace left with right. And when we mirror, we have a whole new set, and all of our joints start with right. So now what we want to do is in our add joint labels menu here, we want to select right, and that's going to convert them all to right. Now if you notice, they're still purple, so just go through to your drawing overrides and change them to the green. Okay, so with that done, next we can add our spine, and I do the spine a little bit different. I choose to opt for a straight spine opposed to matching the natural curvature of the human spine. It really depends on how you rig. Personally, I feel that a straight spine is much more predictable in the rotations than a curved spine. A curved spine, you have to try to match up the local rotational axes and stuff like that, which we're not going to get into right now. But a straight spine is much more predictable. So we're going to go into our front view and go back to our joint tool, and I'm going to place a joint right where the hips meet the sacrum. And for this I am going to turn on my grids so I can snap it to the center line of the grids there, holding down X. And then I want to match my anatomy. So usually your back bends mostly from the bottom of the rib cage to the hip area. That's where you're going to get most of your bending from. You usually don't bend a whole lot in the center of the chest, and then you start bending more up towards the neck. So with that in mind, we are going to skip a couple joints here and give us a couple joints in the center of the, or in the back, to bend from, and then I'm going to go up to where the clavicle is, one at the base of the neck, one in the middle of the neck, and then one is going to be at the base of the skull, and then at the top of the head. You can press enter, and that is usually the joints, the joint that I make. Sometimes if I really need to make a really flexible character, I will place a couple extra joints in the middle here to give extra flex, but I usually will stop right at the top of the rib cage here. So we want to go through and rename all of our joints, starting at the root joint here, going to spine, up to the clavicle here, and then starting at neck, and then starting at head. So I'll let you rename your joints, and I'm going to pause the video. Okay, so now that our joints are properly labeled, we want to go into our side view and make sure that our joints are placed properly. Now, we don't want to move, we want to keep a straight spine. So I'm going to place the root joint so that the whole spine stays just inside the skin. Okay. And then the exception to that rule is going to be our head. I place that in the center towards the top of the head there. Okay. Now we want to add joints to our joint chain, and you can do that by going back to your joint tool, and you want to click right on top of the joint that you want to add to. So in this case, we want to add our jaw right at the base of the skull. So I'm going to place a joint right about here, right about where that jaw is going to pivot. And then down to there. You hit enter and then rename these two joints. Okay, so now that our spine is pretty much done, we want to go through here and use our joint labels and label our spine accordingly. So make sure that everything is center. We're going to turn our joint labels on, and Maya doesn't distinguish the difference between center and none. For me personally, I choose to, whatever is going to stay in the center, I choose to make it center. I use none for things like props that can be either centered, left, or right. So I'm going to make sure that these guys are all center, and then I'm going to go through and relabel all my joints. So spine, 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 so on and so forth. I'll let you go through and do that. The one exception is you will have to go through here for the jaw and go to your joint labeling and go to other, right here, and then label it jaw. Maya does not have a default label here for jaw, so that is the one exception. Okay, so now that we have our joints labeled, we want to go to our drawing overrides and change their color. I usually will go with this kind of rust red because I choose to later in future steps I choose to make my center curve or center control handles controls a bright saturated red, and so I make my joints a less saturated version of that color. So I will pause the video and let you change the color of your joints if you wish. Okay, so now that we have our two sides, our spine, our legs, all set up, I'm going to turn off the joint labeling for these guys since we already know that they are done. And then I'm going to come in here and do my arms. Now remember, you only have to do one side because you can just mirror the joints over. So I'm going to go into my front view here, go back to my joint tool and start at the clavicle, go to the point where the shoulder pivots, and then I'm going to go to the elbow, to the forearm, to the wrist, out to the first knuckle of the finger, or the middle finger, the second knuckle of the middle finger, the third knuckle of the middle finger, and then the very tip of the middle finger, and then hit enter. Now, one thing I do want to do before I continue is talk about the joint radius. And if you notice, most of my joints are the joint radius, or the size of the joint across, is determined by its length. So you'll notice this really long one is a lot thicker than these smaller ones, and that is based off of our joint radius. It is also based off of, if we go to our joint tools tool settings, it's also based off of these settings right here, the bone radius settings. So you have your short bone radius and your long bone radius. If you were to set these at the same setting, the same size, then all your bones would be the same size. I personally like to go through and actually take the time to go to my channel editor and change all of these to the size that I desire. So I'm going to go through each one of these and change all of these to 0.5, and you'll only have to do this once. And the advantage to doing this is your joints will be one size. So if someone were to go up to, say, display, go to animation, and then joint size, this joint size does not actually change the joints. It merely changes the display of the joints. So you can display the joints two times the size as they normally are, but their radius is still 0.5 in comparison. See, like these are like 1. These the green hip joints are 1. The root joint is 0.5. So it's really only a display thing. So I'm going to change my display back to 1, close that, and I'm going to go through and change all of my joints to 0.5. So I'll let you do that and I'll pause the video. Okay, now that you have all your joints set to 0.5 in the radius, the exception to that rule is going to be in our fingers. 0.5 is simply too big. So I'm going to reduce this down to 0.25 so that our joints stay within the finger of our mesh. And that is going to adjust our joint placement ever so slightly, so just fine tune that to match your mesh. And then I'm going to go to my joint tool, and I'm just going to set both of my joint radiuses to 0.25 so I don't have to worry about redoing those again, just for time constraints. So now we want to add joints for each of the fingers. So we're going to start at the wrist, so click the wrist, and then start at the first knuckle here for the index, going to the second knuckle for the index, the third knuckle for the index, and then to the very tip of the finger. Hit enter, hit G to re-invoke the tool, and then click the wrist, first knuckle, second knuckle, third knuckle, and tip the finger. Enter, G, and do it again. And then here, where the first knuckle of your thumb is right about where the radius or the ulnus or whatever is the bone that goes right here on the wrist meets the hand. Then there's one right there at the meat of the muscle, one towards the tip, and then the tip of the thumb. Okay. So now you want to go through and just rename all of these, and then I will go into my top view and reset these. But for now, I'm just going to pause the video, rename them. I will also color them to my purple, and then use my joint labeling here as well to relabel them. And I'll let you go through that. The exception is there is no clavicle, so I choose collar. Shoulder is there's a shoulder, there's an elbow. Here I choose other and label it forearm, and then for the wrist I label it hand, and then the index fingers and all of that, the fingers are right here. So I'll pause the video and I'll let you go through on your own and relabel and color and name your joints. Okay, so with my arm joints properly labeled and named and color coded, I can now close my joint labels menu for right now, and I want to go into the top view and adjust my joints. Now the issue here is I can't see the collarbone, and it's hard to see where the shoulder meets, so on and so forth. So a trick to that is going to your camera settings by clicking on this second icon right here in your viewport, and going to your near clip plane and far clip plane. So I just adjust these down, and the far clip will adjust everything that is far away from the camera. So if I lower this to say 80, you can see that now the hip is gone. Maybe change this to 78. And then for the near clip plane, maybe change it to something around 72, maybe 73. You just kind of adjust and go back and forth with the numbers until you find something that works for you. This way I have everything below my arm is more or less gone, and everything above my arm is gone as well. So now I can go in here and place my clavicle where it needs to be, place my shoulder, my elbow, my forearm, my wrist, oops, and then I want to zoom in, and let's see, I have my middle finger, place that right about there, first knuckle, and I'm just sort of guessing where these go. I'm going to adjust it in other views in just a little bit. Let's see. We have our first joint for our thumb right here. The second joint is right about there. Our third joint, and then the tip of the thumb. Select one. We have a pinky. He is way back here. That. Then we have our ring finger. Place him like so. It's kind of hard to see with the geometry kind of in the way, but we're just sort of roughing it in. And then our index finger. Roughly in place. So now I go to my perspective view, and for this I can turn off my joint labeling, and I just want to make sure that all my joints are where they need to be. Like my clavicle is just a little bit too far out. Maybe move him back inside the mesh. Shoulder needs to be adjusted a little bit. About right there. And that should place my elbow in the right place, my forearms in the right place, my wrist is in the right place. And then now I want to go in here and adjust my fingers. So my thumb, and if you use the center of the manipulator, you do want to make sure that you look in all views to make sure that you are placing it in the right spot. And then we place the tip of the thumb something like that. Okay, and then we go to our index finger. Maybe bring him in a little bit. Not quite in the center of our mesh. Our first knuckle comes out just a little bit more. And then it goes back into our mesh. And the more time you spend on getting your joints in the right place, placing them correctly, the better your character will deform when it's animated. So definitely take the time to place these in the right spot now, opposed to once your character is fully rigged and you're kind of stuck with what you have. So I'm going to go through and place my joints. Make sure that you look in all your views and just pivot around and make sure that all your joints are in the right place. And like I said, I'm going to pause the video and then I'll come right back and we'll mirror the joints over. Okay, so now that we have our joints placed where we want them, I'm going to go in here and select the clavicle, go up to skeleton, mirror joints. And since we have all of our settings same as before, everything should be changed to right automatically for us. And now I'm just going to go into my skeleton, joint labeling, add joint labels, and then hit right. Display my labels, everything should be right. I'm going to go back through, change my colors, and then we're going to parent our joints up and we'll be done creating our skeleton. So I'm going to pause the video and I'll be right back. Okay, so now that we have everything properly colored, labeled, and all of that good stuff, now we can go in here and start parenting our joints to our parent, or to the spine. So we're going to select our hip, shift select the root, and hit P as in parent. Then we're going to do the same to the other side. And then starting at the clavicle, going to the joint right at the base of the spine, or base of the neck where the clavicle meets, and do that to the other side. And now you have a basic skeleton inside your character. So next what we're going to do is we're going to set up the leg and foot controls in the next step. Thank you.